Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the Effective Public Engagement That Doesn't Break the Budget webinar. First, a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the SACOG website. I do want to know we have already received an error message on the recording, so we will do our best to make sure that we are recording. We will have a question and answer session following the presentations, so please send your questions through the question toolbar, and you can do that throughout the presentation. Here is our agenda for today. Each presentation should be just about 10 minutes, leaving up to 30 minutes for question and answer session. I'd like to introduce our presenters today. First, we have Paul Terry. He is the Director of Communications for UC Davis Integrative Medicine and the blog editor for the UC Davis LGBTQ and Health Initiative, Midday Meditation, and Improving Outcomes. He also serves on the Dean's LGBTQ and Health Advisory Council and is a regular campus presenter for the UC Davis Campus Communicators, Improving Outcomes Conference, and UC Davis Forum on Social Media, contributing continuing medical education lectures and workshops about the influence of the internet on social wellness, fundraising, and building safe spaces for minority populations. Ashley Trim is the Executive Director of the Davenport Institute for Public Engagement and Civic Leadership at Pepperdine University, the School of Public Policy. She has worked in public policy at the local, state, and national level for both government and nonprofit organizations. Ashley has a BA in Government from Patrick Henry College and an MPP from the Pepperdine School of Public Policy. She currently writes and speaks about transparency and public engagement for local and online publications, Davenport Institute trainings, and national conferences. Ashley serves as Senior Editor of the Davenport Institute's Public Engagement blogs, oversees the Institute's annual Public Engagement Grant Program, and coordinates trainings, conferences, and partnership projects for the Institute. And this is Monica Hernandez speaking. I'm the Communications Manager for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. I oversee our outreach, media, and communications for a broad range of projects across the agency. I also oversee our technical assistance for disadvantaged communities. I work with a broad range of individuals and organizations that are cross-sector in the Sacramento region. Together, we work to broaden and advance our regional competitiveness through transportation, community development, environmental health, economic viability, and social equity. I'm a graduate of Sacramento State and currently pursuing a communications master's degree at Purdue University. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Paul and Ashley, for agreeing to present with me. And before I turn it over to Paul, I do want to launch into a poll. This will help us get a sense of who is on the call with us today. So here we go. All right. So as we look at our results, I do want to share that this is a new partnership for us with Paul. Ashley and I have presented in the past, so we're very excited about having a diverse audience on here. We'll keep this poll open for a few more seconds. And not surprisingly, we have a fair amount of government officials and staff, nice representation from community-based organizations, nonprofit, and the private sector. And glad to see education folks, and potentially some of you who clicked the other, maybe you'll send me over a private message and let me know what sectors you represent. Thank you for that, and now I'm going to turn it over to Paul. All right. And can't quite hear you, Paul. I'm going to check my settings really quick. Sorry, just one second. I am having an issue with my audio. All right. All right, thanks for your patience.
Here we go.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay. So today I'm going to go over a little on the behavior side of engagement, stemming from an experience I have working with nonprofit, government, and academic programs, as well as some of the graduate work I've done. And so my work now, I work with UC Davis Integrative Medicine, but I also oversee the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning educational resource at the health system. Integrative medicine, we look at all components of lifestyle medicine, including stress management, behavior change, fitness, motivation, employee wellness, but our primary focus is on foods for health, specifically whole food plant-based diets. And with improving outcomes, we're the LGBT Health Initiative here at UC Davis. Both have small staffing, but a clear understanding of the needs of our audience and the systems to work with, especially since we both have few resources. Our traction has been pretty big. So with integrative medicine in the last 2.5 years, we've actually garnered 50,000 online subscribers for our blog and over 20,000 Facebook likes, which makes us the 3rd highest Facebook page at all of UC Davis. And our primary focus is on online education, but we do a lot of in-person presentations, a couple of conferences, things like that throughout the year. And then with our LGBTQ health initiative, we have been a leader in LGBT health for the last 7 years. People come to us with things primarily for online education, but we do conferences and grand rounds each year. We have our California Health Resource Map on our website. We have small staff with integrative medicine, just 2 staff members with a couple of contractors that help us out with things like web design and such. But for improving outcomes, it's all volunteer staff with student support. My interest in building engagement stems from 3 areas: volunteer management, public health, and patient activation. With volunteer management, during my master's, I was really curious as to why organizations received little donations from online sources. But what I found is when you delve into the relationship equity, that ability to understand and meet each other's needs, organizations could garner a high amount of social support, and that social capacity could be redirected into other ways. With public health, my interests are really into virtual population health and information burnout. As we recently found, population anxiety had a major shift with our last election. And when engaging audiences, you don't have to influence health just with healthcare. It comes from all sorts of places, including how each of us communicate with what we have to offer. And then patient activation is really a way to classify people in their health advocacy. Websites like RealAge can identify where you are on a scale, on a health scale. But if you look at the patient activation scale itself, it's really all about engagement. It's understanding how to connect with patients and identifying where they are. I'm sure all of us can categorize our volunteers, our staff, our audience members, the people we're trying to target into one of these 4 areas. And our job as communicators, as educators or influencers, is to strategically deliver content that educates and moves people up the patient activation scale so that we can increase engagement with our organizations and get people to want to come to us and share and participate. You know, we often see people at level 1 who are disengaged all the way to the people who are pushing farther. And what we're going to be discussing is how do you get people so they move up on that to be more engaged and better advocates with your information. And this becomes a challenge for all of us. How do we create content of value for the audience we're trying to reach? I love this graphic of really understanding, you know, what organizations, particularly in academia, are thinking people want and what people are actually going for. There's a short post I have on the Improving Outcomes blog where I discuss the need to take our audiences on a journey, to take them from point A to point B, and to guide them through the virtual noise, to understand what they're searching for, to help them figure out what information is necessary and how to reduce their stress along the way. And that's going to really influence your engagement with your audiences. When you empower your audiences to find, use, and share your information, that's really what we need to figure out. And so that's what I'll be covering today, is that virtual bridge of engagement. This presentation is super dense. I usually do a couple of workshops based upon this. So if you have any questions or clarifications, please put those in the Q&A area. We'll save those for the end of the presentation. But there are a lot of things we could stem off from this presentation. But for the 3 basics to start off with, it's really understanding social support, strategic communications, and the systems we use to deliver information. So let's start with social support. Social, in something like social media, we have to bypass that and go directly towards the media. So what is social support? In Dean Ornish's book, Love and Survival, he discusses how social support is both emotional and informational. It's support that gives us a sense of belonging, it validates feelings, it reduces our anxiety, and it supplies us a path for success. So we need that point where it empowers our audiences, but we also need to make sure that it's quick and easy to access for people. It leads to where they're searching. It gives that call to action, and it takes people on the next step in their journey. We aren't the end point for people. We are just a part of a bigger group of what people are searching for. Think about your websites and content, the emails you send to people, the answers you're providing. Do they empower your audience? How many clicks does it take to find something? Is it faster to Google your organization to locate something on your website? How many tabs are on your landing page? The greater number of choices people have directly impacts their anxiety and ability to rationalize and find the support they need. The next one is strategies for engagement or strategies for communication. At the basics, marketing is data plus behavior. So it's about getting the numbers, but also understanding the who's, the whys, and the how's of our target audience and creating effective strategies to support their needs. One thing we often throw around is this quote-unquote two-way communications. And Grunig and Hunt are researchers who in the 1980s created their 4 models of public relations. They capture what two-way communications really is, and it means collecting data, understanding your target's needs, those who's, whys, and how's, and it means communicating with them, not at them. And if you lack data on your audience, if you aren't using a client relationship management system, a CRM, if you're not observing website or Facebook analytics, if you're not using these analytics to drive the content you create, and if all your posts are specifically on the events and activities of your organization, then you fall in one-way imbalanced communication or propaganda. So you need to think about how you communicate with your audience. Is it really with them or at them? And understand how to shift it to with them, and that starts with listening to them. Now, I really love covering implicit population biases, and we can talk about so many things on here. But at the basics, we need to understand people, cause, and content. And first with people, we target our communities not thinking about the quick shifts people make. And those shifts happen because people work more as networked individuals and less as communities, the communities that we think of. People come together as individuals at different segments of time with different needs. And we can draw conclusions on those patterns. But if we were to target your people with their needs that they needed 1 year ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago today, you would probably not find engagement because you're using archaic systems and they want something now, not what they needed 10 years ago. And this also applies generationally. People 75 and up are some of the fastest adopters of online information, particularly health information. And often we throw around this idea that we need to target millennials, and millennials are the high-tech people. Millennials are almost 40, and people who are 75 are some of the highest adopters who are using these things, and oftentimes we're ignoring this population set. And on the reverse, members of Generation Z are taking up to 2-week breaks away from social media and online platforms to engage with their friends in person. So as we try to target people with technology, the younger generations, we're forgetting the older generations, and we're not understanding how to really target this younger generation. In regards to cause, people come to you because of your purpose and your values, and less because of who you are as an organization. There are so many options for people to choose from. So what they're looking for is who has matching values and purposes, and is that quality there for them to partner with you? Unless you're one of the pieces of information which people are looking for, then you're also probably not important. So it's important to think about the content as well. So people search for the top 5 things people search for: adult content, health information, politics, direction, email, and this shifts from time to time. But people have lives, people have priorities and needs, and your job is to figure out how to answer their needs based upon the data and behavior you're collecting of people. And this goes back to the two-way communication, the previous slide, is that it's super important to understand the data of your population that you're trying to reach and not targeting what you think they need. The last area are the systems that you use both organizationally in person and online. And this is one of the biggest tricks to improving organizations with limited budgets and low staff members. It's through your systems. It's through the platforms that make life easier for you. So first I want to go through content and incentives. Your information needs to fulfill what people are searching for, and that comes from strategy, understanding their needs. People are searching for something for themselves or others, somewhere between altruism and self-interest, and they want it to feel confident and whole. Information fills some sort of void of loneliness. They're searching for something. On the incentive side, people want to be empowered. Monetary incentives are short-lived, and when you look at engaging people online, look at it through volunteer management incentives. You have very little to influence them except with the information and conversations you give. And so it's critical that your education, your resources, your information, all of it is supporting them both emotionally and information-wise so that they can get to the information and get it quickly. This is something that I found with my own research, is that organizations that balance out their content, their incentives, and their social support had the highest engagement levels when reaching people. And that's what you have to do with engaging, building that bridge of engagement. You know, the World Health Organization defines health as the balance of physical, mental, and social well-being. And if you think about like how the Greeks saw the perfect person, it was that balance between athletics, sciences, and theater or spirituality. And the same is true here. When you're thinking about online population health, think about this the same way. You have the content. What is it, the information they need? The incentives. How do you empower them? And that's social support. They're on a journey to find something and to go beyond that. And so be part of that. And the bridge of engagement is really only a part of a process of building trust. So the foundations of building trust happen when you understand how to engage your audience, you partner with your affiliates, the people who are going to validate you as an expert, who are going to share your information, who share organizational mission, vision, and values, and have overlapping cultures. But the third part is to have apps that work with you. So having fast, relevant, and accessible platforms, things that generate analytics. So you need your blog or website, which is going to house your content. You need a landing page that's going to give people a call to action to go somewhere. Your client relationship management system, your CRM, which is going to collect data on engagement, and your social media, which is going to be your outreach. And some of the examples that I give, so you have your WordPress for your website, Infusionsoft or Entreport for your CRM. You can use Authorize.net, which is, you know, a financial component that hooks in with all three of those. You have Facebook, Twitter, but using things like CoSchedule or Buffer to schedule out your content so that you don't have to do social media every single day. And last, I really love Beth Cantor. She has her books, The Network Nonprofit and Measuring the Network Nonprofit. And she just says that organizations trying to use social media without that social culture will be very lonely online. And I think we can look at that backwards too. If your websites are outdated, if you don't have that engagement online, then people will perceive you as a very lonely culture. And that's what I have.
Thank you so much, Paul. Really appreciate your time. We've already got some questions documented that we will include at the end. And with that, we will be ready to turn it over to our next presenter, Ashley Trim.
Great.
Taking just a second to turn over here. And we are open. Go ahead, Ashley.
All right, and can you hear me? Yes, I think we're good. Thanks to Paul for his presentation. I loved just the reminder not to make assumptions about what we know about how to engage people, particularly the comments about the differences in who's using online resources and how. That was great. I'm going to take a few minutes here to go through something that, like Paul, I usually go through in much greater depth. So I welcome questions, and also I'm sure Monica will be sharing everyone's information for further resources. But I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about when engagement of our publics or of our residents is effective engagement. So at the Davenport Institute, we do a lot of training and advocacy with local governments around why they should engage their public. And I think that it's always good to come back to the questions of why we're wanting to engage in the first place and why this is an issue that has become so important today. Why is this moment the moment for public engagement in a way that really it hadn't been up until a few years ago? So about 10 years ago, when the Davenport Institute started, we really highlighted 3 reasons that public engagement was taking off. One was the changes in technology that are changing the way that residents expect to be able to interact with service providers, with their government, with each other. Communications become much more two-way. We're used to being able to provide input into what services look like, as well as into what identities and communities look like. Another was, at that time, in the midst of the economic recession, really a pressing fiscal crisis that in some ways has alleviated a bit as we've come out of the recession, but for many cities is very real, particularly as they look at ongoing unfunded mandates, pension issues, etc. And then the third thing was the rise of special interest groups and the ability, in part permitted by technology, for people to organize in ways that they hadn't before. So while special interests had been an issue for the federal government for a long time, they're increasingly becoming an issue for local governments as well. Now, all of these pressures are still driving public engagement, but I think the last couple years, two that have really risen to the top, even beyond those, are a decrease in trust in government, actually in all institutions at pretty much all levels. Local government still fares a bit better than our national government, but whether it's local governments or education or the media, we just see a decrease in trust in institutions generally. And also a perceived disconnect between people and their governments. And we did an interesting, so as we think about these things, I want to note a couple of surveys that we did a few years back between the Testing the Waters was a survey of local government officials, and Beyond Business as Usual was a survey of leaders of California's civic organizations, where we asked them a lot about their attitudes toward public engagement and how those attitudes had changed over time. I definitely don't have time to run you through a lot of the very interesting showings, but I did want to highlight a few key takeaways from that. And the first one was that when we talked to local leaders, we found that they're recognizing the importance of engagement due to a lot of those factors that I mentioned before. They want more deliberative forms of engagement, but they're concerned that public processes will be hijacked by special interests or gadflies. On the flip side, civic leaders want to engage, but they're concerned about two things. One is the sort of what I call processes, engagement in name only, where we're saying we're engaging with you, but we've really made our decision beforehand. And secondly, governments listening primarily to the most powerful interests. And I found it really interesting that the major concerns overlapped in this way, which leads to the question when it comes to engagement and our desire for better engagement and our concerns about effective engagement, what if they, whether they is the government or they is our community organizations or they are the people who we live with, what if they are not the problem? What if what we really need to be thinking about is a new outlook for engagement? For a long time we've been engaging using old perspectives, old processes, old identities, and old ways of communicating, and we need a new outlook. I found very helpful this little chart by Ray Pratchett, who's the retired city manager of Carlsbad, who talked about how for many, many years when we talked about engagement, we said, well, we need to get all of the stakeholders together. And this type of a model put government at the center of the process and said, who else needs to be engaged in the conversation? But again, particularly with the trust issue that I mentioned earlier, it's become increasingly important to recognize that we're living in a world that needs a new model of engagement. We need to be able to place issues at the center and recognize that government and other decision makers are one spoke on that wheel of how we solve problems. We're facing more complex problems in more diverse communities. We need to have a different way of addressing those. And one thing to think about as we think about how we address those is it can be helpful to think of public engagement as a spectrum of purposes. So it's it is engagement to provide information to the public. There are times, as I noted before, oftentimes local governments and other organizations are dealing with mandates and they just need to tell people what's going on. And getting good information is an important piece of engagement. We've heard a lot about bad information at both the national and local levels over the last year. But as we move down the spectrum, we move into a place where we're doing more engagement that's demanding more of people. So moving into consulting, where you're asking people to help determine, decide among predetermined options, to incorporating, where you're inviting people to be part of developing and prioritizing solutions, to empowerment, where you may actually be asking people to define problems and identify solutions themselves, or to be part of a partnership in the delivery of those solutions. There are times where government is not the thing that can solve these problems. So each of these stages comprises the next stage, but it's also important to recognize that the purpose of engagement is going to look different at each of these. The purpose looks different, but then the process that we use is going to look different depending on our purpose. For informing, if you imagine a city council meeting or a traditional public hearing with the person up on stage or on a dais or at the front of the room mainly providing information with maybe some Q&A, that might be fine for informing, but as we move down toward empowering, we need processes that look very different. We need processes that enable people to talk to each other, that invite people into the room. I find it interesting to do a Google image search of the word consult, and you can see here on my screen I have a very interactive picture when I just Google the word consult. But somehow when I Google the word public consultation, I get something that looks a lot more like an auditorium of people listening as one person presents their opinion. This is, we use the word consultation differently, and we need to be moving more toward things that are interactive. Again, when I look up the word incorporate, I looked, or when we get to the idea incorporate, I looked up the word budget workshop and got that picture on the lower half of the screen there, where you have, what, 5 people in the room, again, one person with their back to the audience presenting things. This is very different than asking people to engage creatively. The picture on the top is a picture of a budget game that was conducted by UNC Chapel Hill for that city. And as we think about this, we need to realize that what we're asking people to do, going back to that previous screen, even the way that we position people is in the budget workshop or in our traditional public hearing, we're really saying we are the experts speaking to you. You are the recipients. You are the ones we're serving, perhaps. But we're essentially treating, we're not really aiming for citizenship. And I use the word citizenship despite the fact that that's become a fraught word because it captures a type of ownership that other words really don't. We are all citizens of our local communities, regardless of where we were born, regardless of our immigration status, our age, our length of time as a resident. Our cities need our residents to be actively involved as citizens. And a lot of times when we think of government, we think in terms of customer service. And that can be a helpful analogy at times. You certainly want to be able to pay fees quickly. You want to be able to have those customer interactions function smoothly. But we also need to recognize that if we focus on that too exclusively, we can run into problems with engagement. Customers have a very different set of identity, understanding, and responsibilities than citizens do. Customers give away their power. They act as consumers. They're thinking in terms of themselves and what they need. Citizens share accountability with government, with other members of the community. They have an active stake in the ownership of whatever the issue or project is, and they ideally recognize that there's a we involved here. It's not just about my interests, but it's about the interests of the community. That's what we're aiming toward. So when we think about setting up our processes, and I'm going to end pretty quickly here because we don't have much time, but we need to think about setting up processes that enable citizens to talk to other citizens, that enable staff and elected to pose the right questions, yes, to provide the right information, but then to sit back and listen and learn, not doing all the talking. It's definitely not simply staff or elected officials answering questions in the front of the room. There may be, again, information that needs to be provided up front. Informing is part of that spectrum. But we need to move into a place where we're allowing residents to talk to each other and to be able to provide insight and input and to recognize the different interests that are in the room. A few objections to engagement quickly is that it can take longer to make decisions, it can be more expensive, or it can feel like we're taking too much time planning. And if we're looking at the short-term outcomes, these can all be very legitimate, but good community building requires a long-term goal. It's definitely worth the wait to put in the time up front if it means that there are fewer interruptions when we come to implementation. It allows the solutions that we come up with to align with community priorities and culture. That goes back to that idea of citizenship and ownership. It permits more effective, sustainable solutions so that we're not back to the drawing board. And in the very worst case scenario, it's far less expensive than lawsuits or ballot battles. We've been involved in a number of processes that involve things like recalls or ongoing lawsuits, and suddenly going to the time, effort, and even expense of doing good engagement up front seems much more worth it. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to engage in other things when we get into the question and answer. So I'll turn it back over to Monica.
Thank you so much, Ashley. That was a great presentation, and thank you again, Paul. I'm really excited to start my presentation. I think why the three of us work well together is that we have a balance of research and theory, and then I am going to jump into what are the tactics that are research and evidence-based that you can engage upon to have success in your campaign. So number one is defining your agency's goal and success. That speaks to both our earlier presenters, taking time to really plan. Are you going to inform, or are you going to move along the spectrum to empower? Understanding your audience is critical. You also want to have these conversations with your governing bodies, or if you're a nonprofit, with your stakeholders. What are you really working to achieve? There are language needs, there are barriers. What are successes in using those? And when you set those goals, you also want to start to consider how you set your measurement. And then you also want to think about your budget. This is often where the conversations kind of come to a screeching halt, or people's energies or ambitions are kind of diminished. And I have to say that I'm going to describe some of the things that can help you overcome budget barriers, because yes, it is a reality in the public sector, it's a reality in the private sector, it's a reality as well for nonprofits. A couple of things that I have found most effective as a government agency is developing some partnerships and starting to really think creatively during your planning process, working to identify your partners. And those partners will often help create cost savings by executing events. The photo you're looking at right now is a farmer's market where we held one of our workshops a few years ago. As Paul mentioned, understanding who your audience is and what their needs are is really important. There are a few ways that you can go about this, both from a public or private or nonprofit sector. You can conduct an environmental scan of existing documents around your target area, geography, to understand some of the demographics that are going to inform what strategies you use. The free U.S. Census, you can get predominant language information, you can get income information, household structure types, and then there's other websites like healthycity.org. This is my favorite, most time-consuming activity for identifying and understanding your target audience, and that's going into the community, meeting with faith leaders, going into community-based organizations, shopping in the community that you're trying to get to know, talking to your cashier, really kind of embedding yourself as a partner will really be rewarding. Next step is number 4, be nimble and diversify your tactics. What do I mean by that is plan, 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 but be ready to change that plan after your first engagement process. When you want to think about your tools, you might do a phone poll. You might have a setup like we have here in this photo, and realize that people are very interested in one particular set of information. If you are assessing your metrics, then you'll know what information you need to bring forward or to highlight or make more accessible. You can think about online workshops, and there is a variety of social media tools that you can use for that. In-person workshops, social media conversations, sounding boards where you have a small or large group of people that you continue to engage over a process, and you start to build relationships, and those folks can become your trusted messengers. You could also implement small group meetings, focus groups. Focus groups are very useful for testing your messages prior to sending them out to a broad group. This is something that can be very useful with low-income communities and so on. And of course, social media tools that I would recommend putting into your toolkit. You can create playlists on Spotify so that you can kind of set a more open tone as you're waiting for people to come into your workshop, partnering with, like we did, a farmer's market, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, and of course you have Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, and so on. And then a 5th tactic that has proven to be very successful for us is partnering. Partnerships can go across the spectrum, and really it's identifying your mutual interest with your partner. These can be community-based organizations, faith-based organizations. You can see here again, this is a different farmers market where we had a public workshop. We also partnered one year for engagement with our mobile food truck group that has mobile food truck events around the region, and they actually became a partner in social media when we talked to them about what our purpose was and that we were really trying to reach people from a diverse background around the region, families, and so on, and it worked out. And then, of course, you do want to engage with your governing body. Ask them for their neighborhood leaders, ask them for staff support, and so on. And then a 6th and important note is to be context sensitive and culturally appropriate. This, I think, continues to be a barrier for helping people from disadvantaged communities, whether that be income, communities of color, other marginalized communities, religious, sexual orientation. Understanding that these are real barriers to true public engagement and addressing them, acknowledging them, and then also finding trusted resources from within those communities will help you reach a higher level of success. When you're going into a community, take time to learn the history of that community. You might be going into a community with a great issue related to a new bus stop or bringing bus service to the area. And when you go into that community, you might realize that that's not the community's priority. So recognize while we, the public engagement practitioners, might have some really great ideas of what's missing or what's needed, our number one job when we enter into a community is recognize that we are the guest and we need to listen first. Another thing that you can do when you're working to be sensitive to your communities is understand language and develop your materials in the appropriate language. And another time where this partnerships can play in is in this environment. With partnerships, you can often find a community-based organization to help test your translated materials so that you have the appropriate literacy level. And then moving on to our final step, which I think is very important, measure, evaluate, and adapt. And this is an ongoing process. So you're going to spend, if you're thinking of your public engagement planning and execution along a spectrum, your planning for the event should be about 80% of your time, and executing your events is 20. As you start to execute each individual event, you should have predetermined evaluation and measurement criteria, and you assess that after each engagement and then make adjustments so that you are continuously improving and you're getting feedback from your participants. This kind of adaptability, this is somewhat adopted from how tech companies work, and that's an extremely fast and successful growing industry. And what they do is, if they fail fast and they adapt. And I think as public engagement practitioners, we can really benefit from adopting that mentality. Again, measuring and evaluating, diversifying how you get information. I think you've observed from the pictures that I've shared that we really work on getting into the community, places where people naturally are gathering. We don't hold meetings in city halls anymore. That's kind of the old school, as Ashley described. We're going to where people are and recognizing, as Paul noted, what are their needs? Does everybody have time, interest, capacity, ability to have civic engagement, or even know how to enter in the process? No. So our job is to bring the information out more accessible. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pause because we do want to make sure that we can get to our question and answer session. And we have some coming in. And our first question was for Paul. And Paul, our question is, what are some examples of incentives?
That's a great question. So on the basic level, you know, if you're looking at monetary incentives, it's like offering people a book or a Starbucks gift card or something that is of interest to them. When you look at empowerment, it's really using the words in your messaging to uplift people. You know, often we overlook the content writer and the person whose job it is to transform emails and social media posts and our verbiage on our website. That's so critical. If you're looking at an incentive to drive people to use stuff, use words that make people feel good and empower them to take charge.
Great, thank you so much. And then a question for all of us, so for Ashley and for Paul, what are ways to measure and evaluate public engagement?
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit with that. So there's a couple different ways to measure. A huge thing is just to ask people. So there are examples of basic evaluations that you can offer people. You can also make it a little bit fun. If you have the ability, and this depends on your audience and the technology in the room, or if you have access to some stuff, you can do a little bit of even keypad polling, which people tend to like. But you can have written assessments that are pretty basic. You want to ask some basic questions, and even just talking to people. I know all of this sounds very basic, but that can be very useful for evaluating as you go. Those are the kinds of evaluations you need to be doing after every event or meeting or whatever it looks like. That usually a combination between having people who are in the room and can just talk to people and ask them and get a sense of how people feel it's going, along with a more formal, you know, maybe half-page or one-page evaluation form, and there are examples of those online. I can share some of what we've used. But that's really for evaluating your process as you go. Longer term assessments can be harder. A huge one of these, a huge insight for these are those surveys and assessments of trust. And there's a couple different ways to get at that. The Census Bureau actually includes some questions about trust, and Gallup always has their local government questions about trust, but it can be a bit hard to access. The Census Bureau stuff is easy because it's actually by census district. Gallup's can be harder to dig into. A lot of cities have their own citizen satisfaction survey, and a lot of firms are beginning to add questions about trust and satisfaction to those. I say that's tricky because, well, good engagement certainly can impact those. A lot of other things can impact those as well. So it can be difficult to draw strong causal relationships between those. Also, good engagement takes effect over time, so it can take longer to hear from people. So I guess for my quick answer is that the immediate evaluation is very important. There are a number of tools and assessments out there that I'm happy to send to anyone if they email me. The longer term things are things that really as a field we're still working on. How do you isolate the cause and effect there? But happy to hear from Paul or Monica, and also to learn from them if you guys have better, great ideas.
One of the things that we see is that there's a lot of burnout with surveys. Our society is now inundated with surveys, whether they be fun or at work. So it's really hard to capture really good data with surveys because we have the ability to put barriers on, so we're not really getting a huge scope. But as far as engagement goes, we look at our open rates, our click-through rates, the data on our website, what people are engaging with, looking at all the stuff that's happening to build that relationship. Ashley, you have a great point that it takes time. It's not something you're going to see instantaneously, but looking at the last couple of years of our interest level, of our engagement level, you could find data on open rates. An open rate around 5 to 10%. It can be low depending on what organization, but our open rate is around 30–35%, which is quite high, especially for academic medical institution. So that's one way we can do that. We can see the outcome of that engagement. So when we do our events, so our last online event, our 21 Food Day Challenge, in 10 days we had 25,000 people register for it and over 10,000 people in a private Facebook group. We sent out a survey, and within 24 hours we had 425 people take the survey. So that's, just seeing the activity of how we engage people is another way to show that there is really good engagement going on.
Yeah, and actually, if I can jump back into your point about looking at responses, I would say in face-to-face engagement, you do want to think, again, going back to your purpose, to have that really defined up front can help you know whether you've reached it. So what is the quality of information? Do you have a sense that there was appropriate diversity in the room? And that's research you can do ahead of time to know what would a representative group from your population look like, and is that in the room? And if not, thinking about how you can get them in the room. I would say for face-to-face, don't just focus on numbers, really have that purpose question in your head, because there can be times where not having the numbers in the room really means you need to find other places to go to and other ways to go to. It can also mean that, depending on the issue, that most people are satisfied with how something's going and they don't feel the need to weigh in on it. And that can be tricky to find that balance. There's a lot of due diligence, but that can be a difficult piece. So I think looking at what your purpose is and then measuring the quality of information in addition to just quantity, it's important for those face-to-face engagements.
Great. Thank you both. I'm actually going to jump to, I'm going to combine two questions here. Do you have a favorite low cost in terms of time and dollars to improve engagement for small nonprofits? And then also sites that can help identify your target audience. And I'm ready to jump in on those, so I'm going to go ahead and start. In terms of identifying your target audience, there's not only just the census that you can use, which provides very good demographic areas. You can actually look at your social media sites and run free analytics if you have Facebook or Twitter that can give you a sense of who's engaging. Typically, you can also run Google Analytics on your website. That's free. It's very user-friendly, and you can find tutorials on YouTube if it's something new for you to target your audience. And what that can also show you is tied to what Paul said in looking at your metrics of your website and what are people coming to look for. So are they clicking through a bunch of links and then landing and spending 5 minutes reading through one piece of information? That's going to give you enough information to start to consider how you might change that information. And then also from a strategic planning perspective, what role does that play in your mission, in securing grant funding to run your operations? In terms of tools, it really does depend on what kind of engagement you're trying to do and what your audience's relationship either with you as an organization or on social media. So for example, if I was really wanting to target women between the ages of, I think, 35 to 45, I'm going to first think about Pinterest because that is a majority female and that age demographic around about, that's where the majority of Pinterest users are. So that's going to be a better outlet for that group than, say, Snapchat or even Facebook. So really, there are a variety of tools. There are also 2 free online graphic tools, which I think are excellent to help people create a more polished look and something that doesn't look like a government person did it on their spare time. Those tools are Canva, canva.com, and Pictochart.com. Pictochart is P-I-C-K-T-O chart. Both free, and those are very, very useful. I think this is another whole webinar in terms of how to do engagement, but it really is about understanding your audience and letting go of the old way that Ashley described and going to where people are. Paul and Ashley, do you have some additional recommendations?
Well, I would say for your online tool suggestions are great, and you introduced me to Pictochart, and I use it all the time. It is amazing. For nonprofits particularly, I want to echo something that I think all 3 of us have said at different points already, but just not to ever, ever, ever underestimate the value of partnerships, which that can be easier said than done. Building partnerships does take some time, and it takes knowing who you can build partnerships with. But we run a very lean organization here at the Davenport Institute, and being able to connect with our own university here at Pepperdine, but also with universities in the communities where we're in, there are a lot of students who are interested in improving engagement or in particular issues that can be valuable partners and manpower for you. But there are also, it's also just knowing, hey, depending on what issue you're working on, is there a local church or synagogue that would allow us to use some of their space rather than needing to rent a space to do an event or whatever? Or is there a farmer's market that will let us have a free booth so that we can just sit there and reach out to people? Knowing your community and figuring out how to partner and who's going, and with that having a clearly defined statement of your vision, which is important for a nonprofit in particular anyway. But for governments, it would be a clearly defined statement of the purpose of any particular engagement, so that you can have people, so that you can help to receive that buy-in, is really important for keeping costs down.
Now we have reached 1 o'clock. Can I take the liberty, Paul and Ashley, to ask if you might be able to stay on for 5 more minutes so we can work through the rest of our questions?
Of course.
Mm-hmm. I'm good.
Great. All right, and just a reminder, we are recording this and we will send this as follow-up. We've been getting that question quite a bit. So another question is specifically for Ashley. Can you say more about how cities' fiscal crises after 2008 contributed to the need for public engagement?
Yeah, so, and again, this has shifted a little bit. A lot of cities, I've been able to talk to some of the cities we worked with then actually who are saying, hey, this is the first year we've had budget to start filling our staff back up. A lot of it was just simply that the sorts of decisions that were needing to be made in the wake of that fiscal crisis, particularly here in California, were the kinds of decisions that were not just, oh, let's pull in a little bit here, let's pull in a little bit there, but they really got to the heart of questions about the identity of a community and what that particular community expected from its government and expected from each other as they lived in community. And those are conversations that there's a lot of cutbacks that can be done by, all right, let's have a budget expert come in and analyze and show us where we can cut a little bit of fat. But when you're dealing with big crises, you're dealing with things that may end up being fundamental to the identity of a community, and that's not something an expert can help you with. That's something you really need to be able to talk to residents about. A few cities here in California recognized that when they ended up declaring bankruptcy, and we worked with a couple of those cities where residents were completely floored by they had no idea the state that their city was in, not because the city had been necessarily non-transparent, but because of the way it had framed conversations or hadn't framed conversations. And I think that was a wake-up call to a lot of cities saying, oh, our residents need to know what the real situation we're dealing with is here, and we need to come up with some creative solutions. So we actually did a report back just toward the end of the recession called Golden Governance that's available on our website. But that looked at some of the really creative solutions way down on that empowerment end of things, of how governments were working with residents to fill in gaps that were left in the wake of the financial crisis. So I would say that was the main driver there.
It looks like the website software automatically ended our webinar at the end time. Oh, wait, it's reconnected. All right, so we are reconnected on audio. I think some people lost the last bit of that response, but thank you for that. Ashley, Paul, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I didn't. But I really love hearing this conversation of empowerment, understanding and having relationships with community. Oftentimes organizations have these expectations of how they can go online and just reach people, but lack a relationship with the people. And in my last slide, like, that loneliness is very pervasive among organizations.
Thank you. You actually gave a good tie-in to another one of our questions, and I'd like to open it up to both of you, and I could add myself as well. In terms of meeting people where they are physically, has anyone tried the same with their online activities, hosting an online Q&A or a partner's Facebook page or other third-party venue? Other types of non-traditional online engagement.
So
yes.
I can. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say. Actually, you go.
Actually, Paul.
So we actually do a lot of virtual events with our program, and we intermix them with live events. And the thing we found is it's so critical that you have all the relationships and all the engagement everywhere. It plays into everything. So what I mean is that you have those physical relationships, you have those ties with partners, you have what people are searching for, educational information, you have engagement through social media, you have engagement through email. And that all ties in that when you actually launch an online event, which takes 3 to 4 months in preparation of scheduling and planning and stuff like that, that's when people come to you, because they're searching for something and you're delivering that answer, and you've gotten your data, you understand what people are searching for, and content is driven by the data that you have. And so when you do these online events, it's all tying into what you have before. It's just another stepping stone. And just focusing on one of those without focusing on everything else you do would be a mistake. It's a collaborative effort of everything you do.
Did you want to add on, Ashley?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we had the opportunity we worked with an online platform, this was a number of years ago, that was very interactive in the way that it was having residents provide feedback and ideas and really work with some budget questions in Santa Barbara. And one of the things that made that really interesting was in Santa Barbara, there was a really well-respected local news source called the News Hawk that had a lot of local readership. It had much more traffic to its page than the city website did. And again, going back to that partnerships thing, the city actually worked with them to host this entire public forum online, which was great because I think a lot of times we have this sense, particularly in government, of we should do something online, with the sense often of if we build it, they will come, but they probably won't. So being able to find, again, creative online spaces can be a good way of generating traffic. Like thinking beyond your own resources can be important.
Great, thank you. And I would like to add some as well. There is a lot of opportunity and challenge with social media. And when one of the things that I emphasized was diversifying your tactics. Something that you can do, for example, I wanted to reach an audience that is more likely to be a Twitter user than a Facebook user. So I developed in our last outreach campaign for our long-range transportation plan a series of messages and opportunities via Twitter, including conversations. And while we didn't have huge numbers, this is where, again, I think both of us, all the presenters reiterated that numbers of people in a meeting is the old way. And the more modern way is about quality of your information and your relationships. And so while we didn't have 500 people participating, we actually had the opportunity to have in-depth, believe it or not, in-depth conversations on Twitter, questions and answers that then were documented. So I captured those and included that in our overall feedback to our board of directors. Mm-hmm. So I think setting, again, your goals, understanding your medium. We also had an online survey that was available in Spanish and English, and an online workshop that we promoted heavily on social media, recognizing that we might be hitting people who didn't necessarily want to show up to a meeting, but had an interest. So again, I think there's no one size fits all, and it really is about trying, having and planning and executing multiple ways for engagement. And recognizing our time, I think this will be the last question we can fit in for today. Could you share examples of empowerment in public engagement? So what does essentially it look like, the difference between an informing to actual empowerment?
Mm-hmm. So, Monica, I'm guessing you actually have some really good on-site examples of that. But I will say, I see empowerment working in two directions. It can be with smaller groups sometimes, to Monica's point about who's in the room. There are times where it's appropriate to actually use smaller groups of citizens, a task force or something along those lines, where you're really turning a problem over to them and allowing them to come up with solutions. One of our advisory council members, Ed Everett, who is the former city manager of Redwood City, shares a great story about a water saving issue. They needed to save a certain number of gallons of water, and they tried to do recycled water. And that was an issue that, for a number of political reasons and parent safety concerns, blew up in their face, and they initially tried to go the regular government way of, oh, well, we'll bring our experts in and convince you that this is okay, and they just weren't convincing people. It became much too heated of an issue. So what they did instead was they created a task force with equally balanced people who weren't entirely sure what to think about this issue, people who were outspoken advocates for the recycled water plan, and people who were outspoken advocates against the recycled water plan, and basically said, all right, here, we're going to give you resources, we're going to give you time, we're going to give you space, come up with a solution. And what they ended up coming up with was something that the city hadn't thought about, but it was to re-turf some of their sports fields with artificial turf. Just a few of them. They kept grass that was watered naturally in picnic areas and other places where people really wanted the grass. But on some of these sports fields, they did the artificial turf, and it saved actually more water. It was less expensive than the treatment system would have been. And it was just one of those things where sometimes we can think as experts and not realize the expertise that's in our community when people understand the restrictions and the boundaries within which they're working and are able to come up with creative solutions. There's also the partnership in actually delivering services side, and there's, again, I would just for the sake of time reference back to that Golden Governance report that we put out for some good examples of that. But I'm guessing Monica also has some stuff there.
Thank you. We're almost, I think we're in respect of time. I wanted to ask before I added any comments, Paul, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I can go on this, but the one that comes to mind is we had this "Don't Fear the Pancake," and during our 21 Food Day Challenge, one of the things that we asked people is to not cook with oil. And this really freaks people out. Like, how do you cook without oil? And of course, we have a Facebook page of 10,000 people who are asking the same question. Well, one of my good friends, she doesn't cook very often, so when she was doing the challenge, she was very proud that she started cooking with things. But then she wanted to cook pancakes without oil. And this was like sacrilegious. This was like something she couldn't do. And I said, why don't you post it to the group to say, you know, you're having this issue? And so she did. And there must have been 60, 70 people after that who followed up to say they were really scared to cook pancakes without oil. And then they all started doing it. And with success, they all started reporting this. And so everyone is you know, you can educate them and give them the tools to do it. But once you have that click over to find that key to empowerment, it triggers this landslide, and it's just an amazing process to watch.
Great, thank you, Paul. And I do want to just take this moment to wrap up. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you to all of our participants for tuning in. We weren't able to make it through all of our questions. We will look into how we might bring another level of this dialogue. We had questions about metrics, about empowerment versus inform. So thank you all for your questions, participation. This was recorded. We will send a follow-up with this recording to all of you. And with that, we will close it out. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thanks.